Hello, everyone. Super excited to have Dr. Brooke here on the show today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm so good, Karolina. I'm so excited to be on the show. I'm looking forward to our conversation very much today. And let's dive right into it.
Let's do it. So, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do today?
Yes. So, my name is Dr. Brooke Scheller. I am a doctor of clinical nutrition, and I specialize in using nutrition and functional medicine practices to support changing your relationship with alcohol. And I'll give you a little bit of my background career wise and how I ended up in doing that kind of work. I have an extensive background in working in clinical practice, mainly in working with chronic illness. So I've worked with a lot of autoimmune disease, GI disorders, a lot of mystery symptoms, weight loss, and kind of the works. And in 2017, I left my clinical practice and started working in the startup space in the food world and really loved it, really loved taking my one-on-one experience and really scaling that to reach more people. I worked for a company that shipped millions of meals to people, and the nutritionals that were made were based off of my recommendations. So it was really exciting to be a part on a nationwide scale. And in June of last year of 2021, I made the decision to leave my job and to start my own business. And at the time, I was mostly looking to do consulting work in the startup world. And ironically or not ironically, in June of 2021 was also the month I got sober. And so I kind of coincided this sobriety journey with this new business journey and was really feeling out what I was going to do and who I was going to be and what my kind of niche was going to be in. And to give you a little bit of backstory, I had been working on a book chapter in a textbook on integrative approaches for substance use disorders. And I authored a chapter on nutrition and supplementation. And I was working on that in late 2020. And the same month I got sober and quit my job was also the same month that that book came out. And it was bizarre because I won't say that it changed my reasons to stop drinking or that it affected my reasons to stop drinking. But it really, when I finally got, free from alcohol and clear-minded a little bit, I looked around and I realized that we're not talking about nutrition and alcohol. We're not talking about really a lot of the biochemical things that are going on, not only when we drink alcohol and the damage that alcohol can cause, but also what's going on in the body that might make me or you more susceptible to not be able to stop or to develop an issue with it, to have things like depression or anxiety that contribute to the reasons why we drink. So in September of 2020, I decided to pitch for a book deal. And after really starting to dive into the research and starting to write that book, I decided to pivot my entire work around how to inspire people to use nutrition as part of their sobriety journey as not only a way, again, to repair and recover our body, but also use it as a way for us to get sober and to stay sober for the long term. So it's been a wild ride, but I can absolutely say with certainty that getting sober opened up a path for me on what I feel like is my life purpose and that I had been struggling to find for so long. And by simply removing alcohol, well, it's never just simply, my life changed so significantly. And I'm so immensely grateful for that. And that's part of why I want to help others feel inspired too.
Wow, I'm so fascinated by your story. And especially since you come from this medical background, obviously you're a doctor, you knew all this research and stuff. And so I'm so curious, you already were writing about how alcohol affects the body and different, nutrition for, quitting it and stuff like that. And, I'm sure some point in your career, doctors have training around addiction and or alcohol. So how did you conceptualize it in your mind of what that was versus what you were doing? And what was the thing that finally made the cognitive dissonance to be wait a minute, I want to change too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. And While I wish I could say that we had more explanation on alcohol use and addiction in my training, now I have a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate in nutrition. And I can tell you that we probably breezed by the topic of alcohol a handful of times. Now, one of the things that I often share with people is the way we break down alcohol, it's a nutritional process. Our body is essentially metabolizing it in the way that it's going to metabolize anything that comes into our system. So it's absolutely a nutrition related topic. But what I can say is that the world doesn't like to talk about alcohol and how alcohol negatively affects our body. But what I can share is that for a long time, I really felt like I was living a double life. I felt like I knew exactly what alcohol was doing to my body. I knew that it wasn't good for me to continue drinking on the way that I was. And I had been a big drinker since I was a teenager. I hung out with people who were drinkers in high school and college. I dated drinkers. I, of course, found the coworkers at my jobs that would go out and have happy hour. And so I really chose being in those situations. When I look back now, I didn't think that I was drinking because I had pain or trauma or things that, a lot of people talk about when they do get sober. And I thought, no, I just really like drinking. This is just, it's part of who I am. It's part of my personality. And for a long time, I always wanted to prove that you could drink alcohol and be healthy, right? You could take certain supplements, or you could do a certain diet or detox once every 4 months, and that would cure you of these ails from alcohol. And when I really start thinking back on it now, I was struggling for many years, feeling like I knew I was drinking too much and that I needed to stop, and yet I couldn't. I think what I like to share is you can have all the knowledge in the world and know exactly what to do, and it doesn't mean that we can do it. These types of substances, alcohol specifically, is addictive to anyone who drinks it. So we used to think that only people with a genetic susceptibility could develop an addiction. You had to have environmental exposure and all of these traumas and things like that. And yes, that is all very true, but anyone who continues to put alcohol in their system will continue to develop a dependency on it. And so regardless of what type of trauma we have or the backstory we have, we can always link that back to reasons why we drink alcohol. So it's more in my understanding now of, I want to take the stigma away from it, like we all want to do, right? The stigma away from, not being able to open up or have conversations about how we're drinking. It doesn't mean that you have to identify as an alcoholic or an addict or any of those other words that I think are very scary for people to have to identify themselves as. But really what it's about is, when you drink, do you feel good? Do you wake up the next morning feeling like you can tackle your day, like you have energy? Or are you waking up feeling like you're zapped? Are you waking up with regrets, with hangovers, with, wishing you hadn't done that or fought with so-and-so, or, even waking up just feeling uncomfortable in your skin? And that doesn't mean that you have to have a problem and you have to be drinking every single day. Even if you drink a few times a month and you feel that way, there's change that is possible to be made. So it really took a while for me to recognize that. And through a series of events, I would say over 6 months, where, I had just gone through difficulty with a relationship and some difficulty with friends and while traveling. And I recently shared this story on another podcast that my partner at the time, who lived about an hour and a half away from me, we were in a semi-long distance relationship. He had one morning expressed his concern about my drinking. And at that moment, it was almost like I was waiting for someone to see me. It was almost like I was waiting to be caught, because I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I could still kind of justify getting away with it. But the minute that he brought it up, and he didn't say to me, hey, you have a problem. Hey, you need help. It was more of I was kind of worried about you this weekend because of what happened, how much you drank. And it, for me, just opened my eyes up to see, okay, the jig is up. It's affecting other parts of my life that I am not in control of. And that was the first day that I was sober, and that was June of 2021. And now I'm happy to share, as of today, a little over 15 months sober, and now doing this work, just really wanting to share the benefits of sobriety and help others to get there and get through those difficult points and know that they can do it, and they will feel better about themselves and in what they're, what they have ahead of them in life.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing just like the thought processes and just how, your career and then this separate part of your life kind of coincided, because it's just so interesting that, like you said, do you wake up the next day feeling well? Well, I would argue that nobody wakes up the next day after drinking feeling like $1,000,000. Like, even if it's a slight difference, there's that difference there. There's that lowness in mood. And that's because alcohol changes the way our brain chemistry works and the way that we feel. Like, it's just natural and normal. So it's so interesting, but like, we've so been shoved down our throats how normalized it is and how it's part of our culture, and this moderation kind of illusion that we're all supposed to follow, which now the medical literature is all saying that doesn't exist. There's no safe
Right.
amount. And I think for so long that, especially like doctors, like I'll speak with clients who say something to their doctor, and their doctor like literally belittles them and is like, no, you don't have a problem. And it's like so many people who might themselves be drinkers aren't willing to then look and see someone else when they're saying something like, but wait a minute, I'm not happy with this. Wait a minute, I don't like how this is playing out in my life, because we just look at it in this really black and white way, which isn't super helpful. So I love your story so much. But going into, the way that you've brought in functional medicine and nutrition and all of your, career into helping people now go alcohol free, tell me a little bit about, you mentioned a lot about the gut and how alcohol affects the gut. And like, just for someone who has literally like no idea, like they've heard that word thrown around for the last few years, but they have like no idea, like, what's the gut? Is the gut the stomach? Is the gut, like, what is the gut?
Right.
And how is it affected by alcohol? And then how would removing alcohol start changing that?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for that setup as well, because sometimes we forget what we know all too well, which is that some people don't have the understanding of what the gut is. So I'm happy to share a little bit more on that. But the gut is kind of a overall generalized term for our digestive system. Mostly what we're talking about is the small and large intestine, colon, and kind of the lower part of our bowels. And the reason why the gut has gained a lot of popularity over the last several years is that we are now understanding the complexity and the diversity of the microbes in our gut. Now, the microbes are made up of bacteria, yeast, viruses, parasites, and all of these are needed and required in order for us to sustain life. So we have more cells of bacteria in us than we have our own human cells. So while this can sound kind of icky and scary, it is actually this very fascinating kind of organism, if you will, that controls a lot of different pathways in our body. The gut microbiome affects not only how we digest, and I like to kind of set that up as being, when we think the gut and we think digestion, well, we think going to the bathroom or feeling bloated or having reflux. But the gut is now known to affect all of the other organ systems of the body. So we know that the gut helps to produce certain neurotransmitters that affect our mood, like serotonin, for example. The gut also is going to affect our ability to learn and think and have a clear mind and be able to focus and be productive. The gut impacts our hormone levels. It impacts our thyroid levels. It impacts our inflammation, our immune system, and really every area of the body. It kind of goes back to the idea that the gut and the gut microbiome is this centrally located organ that sends out signals to all these other areas of the body. Now, the way in which alcohol can be troublesome for the gut and the gut microbiome is that alcohol can tend to feed some of the harmful bacteria in the gut. Now, you may have heard of probiotics, and probiotics are what is known as our good bacteria. The reason that we take a probiotic supplement is because we want to increase the amount of good bacteria in our gut. But naturally, we have both good and bad bacteria in our gut, right? So it's all about the balance of keeping enough good bacteria to outweigh this bad bacteria. So, anytime we have a diet that is rich in sugar, rich in carbohydrates, and also rich in alcohol, it's going to contribute to an overgrowth of this negative or harmful bacteria and lessen the amount of our good bacteria. So, it's going to create a dysbiosis, what we call it. Um, and what some of the literature shows is that there are specific organisms, specific types of microbes that actually can feed off of alcohol in the gut and can send cravings essentially and signals to the brain that desire more alcohol in the body. So this is one thing I like to talk about. And there's a few other things and tips we can talk about towards the end as well, Karolina, that when we have a craving for alcohol, or we feel like we don't have the willpower, for example, to say no or to get through a difficult time, it's not just that we are ill-willed or we are not capable or we aren't strong enough to say no. There's a lot of things biochemically that go on in our body that make it really difficult for us to say no in a situation. And we can talk about low blood sugar, but that is one area that I very adamant with most of my clients on focusing on, because in these kind of quick situations, we can't necessarily have a quick impact on the gut, but over time, it will be affected by the amount of alcohol that we drink. And when we do cut it out, we still have this dysbiosis that might be present. So we want to support that anytime we're eliminating alcohol and want to rebuild and realign the system. The other thing that I want to mention about alcohol and the gut is that you may have heard of something called leaky gut, and it's also known as intestinal permeability. And what that means is that the lining of our gut is made up of a single layer of cells that are held together very closely. I use my hands like butt to butt, and they're held together by something called tight junctions. It's essentially the type of connection that they have so that they're really closely linked together, and only very small molecules like vitamins and minerals can pass through. So when we have any type of toxin or certain medications, environmental toxins, and alcohol can actually start to disrupt these tight junctions and create impermeability, a permeable layer, within the gut, where actually we have an immune process that starts happening. And this process can contribute to the reasons why alcohol can be linked to autoimmunity, inflammation, not only in the gut, but throughout the body, can also contribute to mood imbalances, and other systems are affected by this as well. So complex system, and a lot to be said about that. But the gut is always one of the key focal points for me, more of something that I like to support for ongoing and long-term sobriety so that we can kind of reduce our risk of relapse or going back to our drinking behavior.
That's so fascinating. And I'm curious, so like that's what happens when alcohol is present in the gut, and how even removing it for a short time doesn't just fix it overnight. But what can someone start doing then to start healing that gut, promoting that good bacteria to come back into balance and stuff like that after drinking?
Yeah, great question. So absolutely one of the first things, and this is probably something that you could gather from that previous, answer, but eliminating alcohol is going to be the first thing, because the more that we put it into our system, the more disrupted our gut tends to be. I've heard some notions years ago that even a single alcoholic beverage can increase intestinal permeability because, again, of the way that it is broken down to these toxic compounds when metabolized in our body. So there's a few things that you can do if you're listening and thinking that you want to support your gut. You can start thinking about increasing your fiber intake. And fiber is found in all of our plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds. And fiber is not only helpful for regulating bowel movements, which I think many of us know it to be useful for, but certain types of fiber can also feed the healthy bacteria in the gut and help to kind of fertilize, if you will, or help to develop more of that healthy bacteria in the gut. So it also just helps to restore a little bit of balance in the system. It's going to help kind of clear away any excess waste that may be hanging out in there. And it's also going to bind to things like excess cholesterol, excess hormones, which also can be linked to alcohol use. Of course, there are things like probiotic supplements, which work for some people very easily, but some people don't have the same outcome. And if you're someone who has tried a probiotic and felt worse or felt like it irritated your digestive system, sometimes that means that there's a larger imbalance or a larger overgrowth of that negative bacteria. That when I'm working with clients in a one-on-one setting on this, we actually split it into two parts where we would initially use different types of herbs and supplements to break down some of that bad bacteria before we put in more of the good. So in regards to a probiotic, you could try it. If it works, great. And if not, just know that there's maybe something else to be done in the system. And then lastly, I'll just mention probiotic rich foods, any type of fermented dairy, like kefir, like yogurts, kimchi, sauerkraut, pickled vegetables, kombucha, those types of things are all going to promote or introduce more of that probiotic bacteria to our system. But in a similar way, if you consume those and you do get a negative reaction, I would say it's worth looking into a little bit more as to what's going on in the gut.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that so much, especially just like the empowering nature of this. You know what I mean? Like we're not just destined to live in whatever conditions we find ourselves. There's so many ways, so many little, knobs we can kind of pull and play with to really improve how we feel on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, do you find any other deficiencies when it comes to other nutrients or like vitamin levels or any other things that people can do from that nutritional standpoint, maybe even outside of the gut after they've ditched alcohol?
Yeah. Well, the gut is only one piece of the work I do because it's important, but there are these other systems, of course, at play. And one of the other really well-known things that alcohol does is it depletes our nutrient status in most of our nutrients. So most of our B vitamins, our vitamin A, C, D, minerals like magnesium, zinc, calcium, essentially across the board, we're going to become deficient the more that we drink again. So we call this like a dose-dependent relationship where the more we drink, the more depleted we are in these nutrients. Now, the reason that I like to share that with people is that, I think a lot of us think, oh, I take a multivitamin and that's fine. And I'm eating healthy enough. So I'm probably getting enough nutrients. And for a long time, it was really misunderstood the complexity of vitamin and mineral status and what actually is considered to be healthy status, how we even kind of determine based on food labels what is the appropriate amount for someone to consume per day. So I'm a huge proponent of vitamin and mineral supplementation as part of any type of sober or cutting back on alcohol type of program, because it is going to start to restore things like our energy levels. Certain B vitamins are really important for boosting dopamine production and serotonin production. So now we've got these nutrients that are key for the brain that are also deficient, right? So this starts to kind of cross over into the brain area where it creates this vicious cycle of the more we drink, the more we deplete our nutrients, the lower our nutrients, the lower dopamine we have, the more we want to drink, right? And we go round and round this cycle. And when we can start to naturally boost dopamine levels or boost serotonin levels and really start to get kind of into the neurochemistry of the brain, that can be really powerful for people, because oftentimes we find that we want to cut back, we want to quit, but we have that very strong desire, that very strong craving, or that very strong need for that kind of feel good, right? And if we don't exercise that and try to find other things that help us feel good, it makes that process really difficult. But it's also really important to know that some of these key vitamins, B6, B12, magnesium, vitamin C, these are some of the really important nutrients that are required in order for us to produce that dopamine naturally. So I like to look at it as, having a compound effect where you do need to make sure that you're finding new ways to feel pleasure, to, naturally boost dopamine, but making sure we're also getting some of these foods that are key. And one of the other things that I often talk about as it relates to the brain and nutrient status is that amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, are all of the foundations of our neurotransmitters. So that includes dopamine, that includes serotonin, GABA, which is one of our relaxing neurotransmitters. So there are actually a lot of ways to supplement with certain amino acids. But one thing I like to bring up is that I've worked with a lot of people who are vegetarian or plant-based and don't necessarily eat adequate amounts of protein throughout the day. And then that starts to result in some type of mood imbalances. So protein is something that I'm constantly focusing on with my clients to not only ensure that they are having stable blood sugar and feeling more satiated throughout the day, but also as it relates to getting enough of those building blocks so that we can naturally produce those feel-good brain hormones.
Yeah, there's so much there. And I'm curious, like from everything that you're just so up to date on all of this and obviously teach so much about it. If someone is deficient, I know, for example, we could get our vitamin D levels tested with a blood test. But what about like most of these other things you've talked about? Like, how would someone even know where they could be deficient? And, we often get these common recommendations. We'll eat more vegetables. Someone could think that they're ticking that box with like 2 pieces of produce every day. And, if someone else could be getting 9. So it's like a huge difference too, with like that recommendation, eat more vegetables. So like, one, how would someone even know that they're deficient in any of these things? And like, what would be the appropriate maybe servings or just kind of way to structure your eating every single day to make sure you're kind of hitting off the check mark? Because I think that's, like you said, it's very confusing. There's all these different weird labels. Again, 2 vegetables, 9 vegetables, what are we supposed to be doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as tedious as a response that it is, I mean, eating more vegetables is going to be an excellent way to make sure you're getting enough of those vitamins and minerals. I'm a huge proponent of sharing about antioxidants and the different compounds within veggies that drive the colors that they are. So for example, a red, orange, or yellow fruit or vegetable is going to be high in beta carotene, which is a precursor to vitamin A. The dark purple, red, bluish fruits and veggies are going to be high in anthocyanins, and anthocyanins are very protective for the brain. They're protective in the gut and in the liver. And so a lot of it is variety in the diet, because you make a good point that I think some of us think, okay, well, I eat my green beans every night, or I eat my corn twice a week and my peas the other days of the week. And I'm really pushing people over 5 servings of veggies a day. Ideally 6 to 8, which is a lot for most people, especially if you're not doing that now. You're talking like 2 servings per meal. And that can be a big stretch, especially if the diet is not including any, right? So just by starting to get more produce in, and kind of the foundation of the programs that I do is all of the meals are based off of a protein and a fiber-rich food, right? So every time you have a meal, you want to have a source of protein, whether that be fish, chicken, eggs, whether that's a vegetarian protein like beans, for example, and then a source of fiber. So that might be a vegetable, a fruit, that might be a whole grain, for example. And the reason why I like to think of it in this way is, again, not only are these 2 kind of key core foundations to a good, healthy diet in general, But regardless of really what the food is, as long as it is a whole food, it's a real food, you're going to be getting a lot of those nutrients very naturally in there. So B6, for example, which many people are probably on the lower end, especially if you have any type of depression, anxiety type of symptoms, because B6 is so key in the development of some of those neurotransmitters. But you couldn't necessarily go to your doctor and get a B6 test. It's not necessarily done. You'd probably get charged for it. I've never seen a B6 test done in blood before. But what I can kind of venture to guess is when certain symptoms are present, and based on the biochemistry of how the brain works and how these symptoms might manifest, I'll supplement with things like that. B6 is something that I would exercise caution not to use it without a provider or a doctor or a nutritionist's recommendation, because if you take too much, it can cause some negative side effects. And that happens with some vitamins too. So I tend to err on the side of caution. But vitamin B12, for example, which is another one that's key for the brain, is only found in animal-based products, right? So if you are not eating fish or you're not eating animal meat or dairy, you're likely going to be deficient in that. And so it's just something to keep in mind of, for example, if I were to pair a fish with a broccoli side dish, for example, my protein and fiber base, that's going to give me B12. That's going to give me many minerals. It's going to have omega-3 fats in there. And then the broccoli is not only providing fiber, but you've got vitamin C, you've got vitamin A, certain minerals, some B vitamins. And so it is, a little more complex than eat more vegetables, but I do think that that is a really good place to start, especially if you're thinking back to your diet and thinking, wow, I really don't eat many veggies, or my veggies mostly consist of starchy veggies like corn or potatoes or peas.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've been in this functional medicine world for so long now, right? And you've brought in this awareness to alcohol around it. And I'm so excited about, the book that's coming out next year and just all of the things you're speaking about with your career and your social media presence, all this great stuff. So I'm curious, like now that you're kind of like on this other side, and you really can see and study how alcohol has been affecting the things you've been learning about and working in your career for so long, where do you see like the functional medicine or the wellness field going? Do you see it being kind of like a big fat, do they just ignore alcohol and never speak about it? Do you see some awareness raising happening in that space too? Because like there's so many doctors and people that I've seen either do talk about alcohol and are very honest about it, or it's like that's like the missing, like we're talking about every little part of an American diet and for some reason alcohol is not ever mentioned. I'm like, where is it? Why aren't we talking about it? So what do you think is going on in that field, and do you see progress towards this awareness, or sometimes do you see mixed messages?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic. I mean, alcohol is very pervasive in the wellness world. There's a lot of big docs, big figures in the space that are, promoting alcohol use and that being part of a healthy diet. I know people who are adamant about removing all the toxins, removing, getting rid of tap water, only buying organic produce, changing out all of our personal products, et cetera, and yet still drinking alcohol at excess amounts, right? So this is a toxin that we should be considering before actually several of those other things, because we think about the amount of a toxin we're maybe getting when we use a body lotion, for example, is going to be very different than the amount of toxin that we get when we're consuming large quantities of alcohol, right? And so, just like in the rest of the world, I think that it's not always an easy conversation to have, because alcohol is something that people protect really close to the heart. Even working as a practitioner in the past, I would work with clients who would take all the supplements and do all the crazy things. They'd stand on their head. They'd, go out and dance circles on a full moon. And if you asked them to take out their alcohol, it was like a hell no, right? That was the one thing that couldn't be touched. And I think we've allowed for that for so long. We've given a lot of, okay, you can have it. That can be the one thing that you have. But this is one thing that can have such a big impact on everything we're experiencing, right? So if you're someone who's trying to lose weight, or you're trying to balance hormones, you have an autoimmune disease, a gut issue, a brain issue, no matter what you're experiencing right now, today, when you're listening to this, if you are drinking alcohol, even I would say a few times a week, that's going to affect how you feel. And it's exciting to try all these new supplements and new diets and everything like that. But alcohol might be the one thing that's kind of standing in the way from progress. And so, I hope this space is changing. I've been trying to have more conversations about it because, as you know, I'm very outspoken about my work and being sober and trying to change that narrative a bit. I was speaking to a few friends about a month ago about in-person conference that they're running, and they're having a cocktail hour. And I suggested to them to also add mocktails, and just to even have things available, right? Because there's a lot of times that we go to these things, and even if we didn't want to drink, they don't even have water, or they don't even have another option besides water. And so we're not being inclusive when we're not offering these things. We're essentially kind of skirting people instead to drink alcohol. So I think a lot of it is about the continued awareness for people. I think the sober curious trends and the non-alcoholic beverage space, which is booming, is all going to continue to push forward. I think we're going to have a few more years before we see the health community really start to shift. But I'm very hopeful that that will start to happen because it is so impactful.
Yeah. It's so interesting because, I was sober curious where I was still drinking, but just really introspective about it. And like, okay, I don't like how I feel, and I was really, trying to find this kind of medical research. And some doctors would say this, some doctors would say that. And, I would learn so much about, say, sugar or saturated fat or just all these other things. And there were literally books that there was not even a paragraph about alcohol, because I feel like just even the conversation you and I have had today, if I would have heard that like 7 years ago when I was still drinking, it would have started changing my mindset and what I really think alcohol is doing or not. And I think obviously we have this like, okay, alcohol is bad, but we don't really understand what it's doing to the body. And I think if we just had that information, the populace can still do what it wants with it. But like if doctors or health advocates or wellness companies aren't sharing it and aren't, having this part of the conversation, I really think they're doing their constituents a disservice. So thank you so much for everything you do to speak up about it and for enlightening us all today about so many different medical and nutritional and healthy topics. I'm so excited for this episode. If someone would like to learn more about you, where can they go? We'll have all the links in the show notes, guys, but please tell us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Karolina. My website is brookescheller.com. You can learn more about me, my program offerings. I have an online network community of sober curious folks. I also offer an online course called the Functional Sobriety Academy. And I also see clients one-on-one. And oftentimes those are people with more complex cases or a specific health condition that want more personalized support. So I try to offer a range of options for people depending on where they are at and the level of support that they want. And also follow me on Instagram at Dr. Brooke Scheller. And that is where I post a lot of my tips and videos and little tricks that you can use to start changing your nutrition even slightly today so that you can have more success tomorrow.
Oh, I love it so much. Well, I can't believe we're already at the end of this show. I had so much fun. I could talk forever, but thank you so much for, again, just enlightening us and bringing such a cool scientific perspective to, topics we talk about all the time here, but really these deeper look at the body and how alcohol is affecting it. I know for me, that would have just changed the way I thought about it a long time ago. So you're doing really great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.